Welcome in, ladies and gentlemen, to episode 26 of Deep in the Novo. I'm Ryan Novozinsky, joined here, as always, by Sudeep Tumma, the deep part of Deep in the Novo. And today we're going to be previewing OSU versus TCU, a game that every year I feel like is an interesting game, year in and year out. And this year is no exception, obviously, with the Big 12 this year. Teams are just pouncing all over each other week in and week out. There's always, some sort of weird victory in the Big 12, and TCU has had their fair share of those in their victory against Texas and other teams. But let's start, Sudeep. Let's start with this offense, okay? Let's talk about Max Duggan, their quarterback for the past 2 years,
I believe it's second year.
Yeah, this is second year, excuse me. And the rest of this offense, right? And I guess when you're talking about the attack for TCU, you have to start with the dual threat nature of Max Duggan, right? And what he's able to do both on the with his legs and with his arm.
Yeah, he is definitely a dual threat quarterback. He's more like a Sam Ehlinger than like a Kyler Murray or even Spencer Sanders.
I agree.
Right? He's got that sort of toughness when he runs. He's definitely an explosive runner, leads them in rushing yards. But obviously that's a product of how many running backs they use. But at the same time, that's definitely where he starts. He's a good passer as well, got a good arm. Started from when he was a freshman, and what impresses me most is his pocket presence. Of all his attributes, he's got a good arm, good zip, good accuracies. Mechanics a little bit. I'm still trying to figure out if it's a little off or not. Honestly, it's you got a little bit of a hitch there, but it's like a little bit of doesn't pull it all the way back. But he's got a quick release, sure, and his pocket presence impresses me the most. Where he's got some time back there, but he'll step up, step left, step right, avoid sacks left and right. And he'll know when he has good IQ and good feel to understand when he can tuck the ball and run. And it's smart because it makes it difficult where you have to stay so disciplined. It changes your pass rush, changes everything. But Max Duggan's definitely a good quarterback and definitely starts up there.
I think that his IQ is one of the things that sticks out to me as well. When you're watching him in the pocket, maybe it's the fact that he's able to go out there and have some of these big runs that he got this IQ,
right.
but I think that definitely has something to do with it, and that translates well into his pocket presence as well, like you said. And when you talk about you talked about they use I think like a million running backs, and there's a lot of guys there that have abilities to have big games, right? And against OSU, we can probably see that whether you're talking about Darwin Barlow, right? Whether you're talking about Zach Evans, whether you're talking about all these other guys that they have on this team that at any given moment can break out for these Horned Frogs.
And it makes it a little hard to evaluate because, not for us, for us mostly, because you see one game, you see 4 or 5 different running backs taking snaps. And on top of that, Max Duggan, you got some design runs there with him, but also he just breaks out. And when they're at their best, this offense wants to run the ball and set up the pass. I think Max Duggan only threw it 11 times versus Kansas. That's where they want to be. They want to be run first. Zach Evans, their 5-star talented guy, finally broke out against Kansas. He had 12 carries, 100 yards. And that's where they want to be, having all these guys running downhill, creating lanes, keeping the offense, and a complement to their defense. But that's what they want to do. They want to run the ball, and that's where they want to stick, which is something that it's one of those old school football theories that works in terms of keep the opposing offense keep the ball out of the opposing offense's hands by keeping the ball with you, and you do that with the rushing attack. And that's you're right. There's so many running backs there, and they all have some talent for sure, and their depth is amazing. That's what you really stick with. But you got to wonder why there isn't just one guy emerging, right?
Oh, I agree. Yeah, and don't forget, OSU fans, that Zach Evans is the reason that Dominic Richardson is at OSU. You remember that story this past summer where he was the 5-star running back who went to TCU and sort of took over Dominic Richardson, which is the reason he's at OSU now. But talented guy, and like you said, that speaks to their depth at that running back position. And a lot over the field, I think you see they have depth in a lot of positions, which it is a shame because I think this year they had quite a bit of COVID struggles with some players testing positive and things like that. A couple outbreaks for the Horned Frogs. Didn't affect their schedule that much, but my goodness, it affected their performance in terms of on the field and having to adjust to some of these issues. So you almost feel bad for Gary Patterson and company for having to deal with that week in and week out, but I guess every team is having to deal with that for sure. And let's talk about these wide receivers. And obviously it's a run-first thing. You talk about the design runs. You talk about the running backs that they have. these wide receivers are almost an afterthought, but I think there's some talent there. I truly think there is. I think you look at Tay Barber specifically, obviously leads the team in rushing or receiving yards, but I mean, you look at his intangibles, you look at Quentin Johnson and all these other guys that they have in that wide receiver core that I think, can be on their A game if Max Duggan is on his A game in the pass game.
Right. Tay Barber, Quinn Johnson are the two guys that definitely stuck out to me as well. Pro Wells, their nice tight end, athletic guy.
Cool name.
Right. And he's a guy where they even list him at, wide receiver, but the wide receiver, which is tight end essentially. But it's interesting because he's that type of guy where you can throw screens to him. He's an athletic guy, can get down the field. And you have some weapons out there. You're right. There almost becomes like an afterthought. Tay Barber is the one who's really stuck out and impressed. But yeah, definitely some impressive talent there. They got some. It's really got to be a balance, right? But yeah, definitely the wide receiver is interesting.
Yeah, I like this Horned Frogs offense. I think it's going to cause a little bit of concern for OSU. With just some of their running attacks, right? I know Gundy talked about it after, I believe it was the Texas game. It had to be, right, because Sam Ehlinger was running all over the field. Well, maybe not so much in that game, but or no, it was Will Howard and Kansas State.
Yep.
That's right. And he was talking about having to contain a rushing quarterback more. So do you think since then, how much would you say OSU has improved in terms of that? Maybe they haven't had as many rushing mobile quarterbacks as they did against Will Howard, but I mean, they got one coming up this week, I'd say.
Yeah, it's interesting because you start to think about it in the past few quarterbacks, and you think back to that game with Will Howard. We broke it down, and several of those plays were just, lack of discipline. One place opens up a hole. Obviously, credit to Will Howard and his talent, his athleticism. But I think OSU has definitely done a good job clamping down as much as they can. Issue here and there, left and right. There hasn't been many games since. You think of Spencer Rattler. You think of last game, it's been a little bit different. Obviously, Alan Bowman's not quite the runner. Rattler's even a solid runner, and he had some runs here and there where you're just kind of wondering what's happening here and there. But overall, it's been pretty minimal. They've done a good job, but obviously they haven't been tested. But yeah, that's interesting because I think it comes down to if a guy like Max Duggan beats you, it's going to be from play design and complex play design. If OSU's defense is healthy, it's very difficult to grab a lot of yards on them. Do a lot to them, really confuse them, but it has been done, right? A lot of those concepts are things that OSU has been beat when they see things that they haven't seen before. And I think that's what it comes down to, and being prepared for all that, and again, playing contained, playing discipline. Because again, we keep seeing it week in, week out. The biggest time when OSU gets busted, and they usually get busted for big plays because of that lack of discipline or lack of contain or gap discipline. Different things, little here and there, the little edge or the contain and the gaps. Those are the things that have killed them. Because if you look as a holistic view, play to play, most times, you talk about a guy like Breece Hall. He's getting 1 yard, 2 yard, -5 yards, -3 yards, then suddenly 80 yards, then another 70 yards. And suddenly his stat line says 180 something, and that's completely different than what the true scope of the game was. But again, credit to Breece Hall and his running ability and Iowa State's calling up plays. That's kind of where it came from. But again, you wipe away those two plays, and I hate that the notion of just wipe away those two plays.
We both do.
Right, but at the same time, you do that because you can scratch it up to bad discipline on the edge, and suddenly it's a big run, a long touchdown. Those type of things happen, and my whole point here is you look at those plays time to time, they're playing really well.
Sure.
But it's that one little thing that'll bust them. And it's happened many times before in the pass game, in the run game. And that's the issue. You correct little things, and suddenly everything looks great.
Yeah.
And that's where it's going to come down to, because with quarterback running, there's definitely a different dynamic and a different thing. But Kansas State definitely had a strong attack with their O-line, their power rushing game, and Deuce Vaughn, a lot of moving around, a lot of window dressing. So it's going to be interesting how TCU attacks with these guys.
Thematically, that has been the thing all year, right? You have to look at these little issues here and there, whether it's a gap contain issue, whether it's just an over aggressive play from either I don't know, Tyler Lacey or Cody Waltershed had happened to last game, right?
Trace Ford. It's been a lot of people.
Exactly. Yeah. You look at some of these guys, and that makes me say that prediction: Max Duggan will have some sort of 87-yard touchdown in this game, right?
Sure.
Off of one of these gap contain issues. You never know what will happen, but that's something that I could totally see happening, and it'll inflate his numbers. But overall, I'd say, like you said, OSU does a pretty darn good job with containing just little mistakes here and there.
Yeah. And it's much easier said than done. Let's also put that out there. It's easy to say, why didn't he? Hindsight is 20/20 always. But when you're out there in the field and you're thinking, man, I can get this guy. Your natural instinct, because think about it, sports you play on instinct. how much of sports is just, think about it. If you're a really good passer in basketball, you're not thinking, oh yeah, he's open, let me pass to him. By the time your thought is done, he's already covered up. You do it instinctually. You move instinctually. You play instinctually in each and every sport. You don't think about when you're a wide receiver, oh, a cornerback's going to put his hands down on my hip, let me swat him away. You just instinctually do it. You see it. Your brain processes it faster than you can think about it. And that's how you have to do it sometimes. And that's why these little things happen. It's the same reason in basketball, backdoor cuts happen. You would think these professional athletes who are in the NBA, who've been playing basketball, and get paid millions of dollars, would realize when their off-ball man is running past them. But they don't, because that's part of sports. Sometimes you lose your mind a little bit, lose just a little bit of it. And that's what happens. But that, I mean, like I said, it's easier said than done. But it is something that you want, obviously. You're going to desire it 100%, but it is easier said than done.
100%, yeah, totally. And clearly, we are in basketball season because both of our minds are focused on football and basketball season and just examples here and there. And you're right. That's why these backdoor cuts happen, and that's why some of these mistakes happen for OSU. Let's look at TCU's defense, okay? Let's flip sides here and let's check out this 4-2-5 defense they run. And they're interesting because they like their strength, obvious strength up there in the front seven, but
front six,
excuse me, yeah, front six. But when you look at this secondary, oh my goodness, yeah, it is probably one of their weakest things on this team. I'd even say I pointed out as their weakest point on this team. So break this defense down a little bit for us. What does this 4-2-5 defense look like for TCU?
It's really interesting. It is. You start on the front. First off, you got the linebackers, two very talented linebackers, D. Winters and Garrett Wallow, excuse me.
No, that's right.
Yeah, you have those two linebackers, and they're very good tacklers. Garrett Wallow, I believe, leads the team. I think he's all Big 12 last year, I'm sure. Very talented guy. You got some talent there. But it's a defensive line that really impresses me. Your defensive ends with O'Shawn Mathis and Kari Coleman. Sorry, forgetting names. Those two guys are, menacing the outside. Pick up a lot of tackles for loss, a lot of sacks. That's where and it's really interesting because this defensive line, as I'm sure you've seen with Gary Patterson, they are constantly moving gaps and adjusting to the way the other defense is. If you don't even run any motion, you don't move any guys around, you don't do any of that, then they'll play straight up in the gaps that they are.
Right.
But you start moving guys around, you start motioning around, and they are adjusting. And sometimes it'll look a little weird or look like, oh, yeah, they're out of place. They don't know what they're doing because they'll get down their stance in the last second and rush you or stop you. But that's such well-coached, well-disciplined, and it really makes them a lot more effective. Because, yeah, I mean, they're a little deep, too. They got a couple of guys on the second line. But, yeah, those two guys on the outside are really menacing. They're really good pass rushers, especially, like I said, stopping the run as well. They are good, talented guys. So that's where you really find your strength, your top six. Terrell Cooper is also a nice player up there. But then you go to the secondary, and obviously you got the talented safeties with Ardarius Washington, Trayvon Merrick. But then the corner is really where you have issues, and a lot of it comes down to injuries. Obviously, they lost a guy or two to the NFL last year, but then now they're on their third cornerback, I think, at the one side. Hodges Tomlinson on one side is a talented guy, but the other side, CJ Caesar, who's starting now after they lost two guys. He was a special team. He was a third string cornerback special team guy, and now he's in a starting position.
Right.
And that's where you really have a lot of questions. Played well against Kansas. The entire team did. Obviously, I mean, it's Kansas, right? But I mean, that's where you really pile up a lot of questions, and that's where Talon Walls and this secondary or these wide receivers can really start feasting a little bit.
I think they're going to feast. I truly 100% too, and that's not any sort of anything going into that. It's just the fact that OSU is going to be able to just pass all over these guys, right? That's where the main attack should be. That's one of my keys to how this team's gonna beat the Horned Frogs on Saturday. Is you got to air it out, right? And not even just air it out. You have to have that same smart pass attack that they had the other day, right? Against Texas Tech. I think when you have that, when you implement that. That is going to feast all over these TCU Horned Frogs.
And that's where it's so key. You talk about the short passing game, what they implemented really early with Texas Tech.
Yeah.
Get Spencer Sanders out of those bad situations. Don't let him drop back 5 steps, 7 steps, hold the ball for a few seconds, and then possibly get sacked or have to make a bad throw or have to make an unbalanced throw because he sees a pass rusher right down his face. Get him in good situation. Get the ball out early. Get them to your playmakers. Tylan Wallace on curl routes. Who's defending him? Teams, there's cornerbacks when they go one-on-one anytime, even in zone sometimes. they're so scared of Tylan Wallace's deep threat ability. And why wouldn't they?
Yeah.
Because even if you put a second guy, this guy's so physical that just a little bit of sliver of gap and he can go up. That's the difference between this guy and maybe like Jalen Reagor last year or Tyreek Hill, or think of any of the speed guys.
Right.
Tylan Wallace, even if you have him covered, he's not just going to beat you because he's going to run past you like Braden Johnson might. He's going to beat you because he is so physical, where you get him in perfect position, you'll be stride for stride, and he'll still go up and make the catch. And defensive backs are scared of that, and for good reason. But when you do that, then you start opening up different things, the crossing routes, the slants, the screens, because teams have to play differently. And the curl route, this guy runs one of the best curl routes, because he'll just push up field, he'll have his entire body, shoulders down, looking like he's about to go down, then immediately stop on a dime and turn around. Athleticism and route running. But yeah, that's where you start, the short passing game, and from there you expand it, you change, and that's where you attack this defense.
Yeah, you do that, right? And that's where the momentum came last week, right? It started with that. Let's not forget, it didn't start with Desmond Jackson just handing the ball up to him. No, Desmond Jackson got this because they passed to set up the run. They didn't run to set up the pass, right? It was a really good system, and it got Spencer Sanders hot. I think Spencer Sanders, that was one of my favorite games of his last week because of what he was able to do against the Red Raiders, right? And how he was able to attack that early on, and he got the confidence going, and it was amazing. And that's why he looked so great last week. And then Tylan Wallace obviously will be able to feast once again all over these TCU cornerbacks, one of them being a backup special teams guy, as you said.
Right, and it's another thing of not only is a short passing game effective in general, but when your O-line has been struggling all season and you're going up against a front seven like this, why wouldn't you get the ball out of your hands quickly, right? It's always a sound strategy, but it's only better now. And when you take your deep shots, Casey Dunn, Mike Gundy will figure out when this team is looking to blitz, when they'll play single high safety, and they'll air the ball down the field, and that will definitely pay dividends.
Yeah, 100%. And let's talk about these running backs, though. Like we talked about setting up the wide receivers, right? Let's talk about Desmond Jackson a little bit. Do you think he's going to have a similar performance to last week, or do you think the offensive line has it in them to go against this TCU front six?
And that's my that's my key. This offensive line, because not only was it smart on the short passing game and how OSU was able to get the ball out quickly, the offensive line also played great in both facets. In the pass blocking, they gave Spencer enough time when he did drop back and held the ball for a few seconds. When there were longer developing plays, they gave him time. Right. But also the run game. It wasn't a thing of, Texas Tech wasn't ready for Desmond Jackson. It was a thing of, hey, this O-line dominated, cleared holes up, and got Desmond Jackson in good position. I mean, there were massive holes at times, but even when there weren't, there were just enough holes, because even the Dallas Cowboys aren't going to, Dallas Cowboys at their heyday aren't going to be putting truck-sized holes every single play. Some of them you're just going to be doing enough to let a talented running back like Ezekiel Elliott or DeMarco Murray find their way through. And that's what you had with Chuba Hubbard last year. Yeah, he had those holes where he would run through for 80 yards easy, but he also had the ones where he had to find the hole. He had to cut in when he's running in, he makes nice cuts in the hole and finds that sliver of daylight and goes. And when he does that, it looks easy. Right. But that's the vision. And Desmond Jackson showed that yesterday. He showed that vision in the hole. Where's your ability to find the blocks? Because it's not always obvious. You can't just pause the camera and say, oh, there it is. It's understanding, okay, if I cut here, the defensive back will slow just this much enough. The offensive line will get there. The tight end will get there. The block will be there, and I will go. Yeah. It's understanding those little things. And like I just said, it's not always just, hey, you have enough time to think about it. It's instinctual. That vision is instinctual. And I think Desmond Jackson definitely has the potential to. He showed the talent. He shows the strength. He's a guy where he could hit 100 yards easy. I think so. Because you tackle him or you get your hands on him, your body on him, he'll drag you 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 more yards.
Yeah, totally. And that's obviously the key to victory for me, too. For an OSU victory is that play of the offensive line mixed in with the vision, with the patience of Desmond Jackson going into this game. Then
you set up play action.
Yeah, exactly, right? And in terms of pass blocking, too, I'm glad you brought it up because that was something I was concerned about during this week. Because obviously the O-line was able to do it last week, sure. But, man, this week it is a huge test against Coleman, against Mathis. Right. These two great pass rushers off the edge there, that's going to be a huge task for them, especially those tackles there at the end. Tevin Jenkins obviously sitting out for the rest of the season. That's a huge loss, and that's very tough. So these tackles are going to have to step it up, especially during this game against TCU because this is a good front six, and this is a team that's going to apply pressure to Spencer Sanders, right?
Yeah.
And we'll see how they're able to respond to that.
And Josh Sills played well on the right tackle spot. Preston Wilson did as well. I thought he struggled when he came in at center several games ago. But at left guard, they were holding steady altogether. And I think it was good that they got time to practice and time to come together and, stick together and go from there. Because sometimes it is difficult. It is. Because when you're throwing the fire, just one offensive lineman can change everything, right? Because, think about it. You're not just losing a right tackle when you're replacing him with someone else. You're shifting Josh Sills to the right side. You're bringing a new left guard. Everything changes, not only for the individual, that offensive lineman, Josh Sills, who has to change his blocking scheme. Not only is he going from guard to tackle, he's going from left to right.
Yeah.
Right. That's a big difference.
Huge.
Different cues, right? Yeah. You're putting your body weight different places. Your just muscle memory is different. And then in the left guard, you have a new guy there, and a guy who probably should have been, third string, maybe second string before the season started. It's just these kind of things. But, hats off to Charlie Dickey. But in the trenches, especially the offensive line, is going to determine how this game goes, I think. Because that's why OSU's offense looked explosive last week. Forget the play of Desmond Jackson. Forget the play of Tylan Wallace, Spencer Sanders. It was the offensive line. What is the difference between the last game and every other game this season? The offensive line. What was the difference between last game and every other game this season? An explosive offense.
Yeah, totally. And you look at the 2 losses on the season, the offensive line didn't play great in either of those, right?
Yeah.
And that was the reason for these 2 losses, obviously. And then it all comes down to that. You don't get that great game from Desmond Jackson. You don't get that great game from Tyler Wallace, from Spencer Sanders, without it starting up there in the trenches. That's what they say over and over and over again. You hear the cliche. Let's talk about the offensive line just real quick, okay? Just real quick. Let's go. This is a little bit off topic, but let's fast forward next year, okay? This offensive line, I sort of have a weird example to this. 2 examples, actually. When I look at it as a offensive line that if they're getting this experience this year, right, where you have third stringers, right, Preston Wilson playing tackle there and going out there and being able to get this kind of experience now, if you think about next season, it's going to be almost like Tulsa's offensive line last year, right? Where they were a young group. They kind of sucked last year. And this next year, they evolved into obviously a top 25 team in the country. And that offensive line's a big part of it. And similarly, too, is Miami. Miami, remember at the beginning of last season, they were a horrible offensive line. That was one of the biggest concerns for them. Do you think that you could see this evolution, a similar evolution to OSU and with some of these young offensive linemen in there?
I do. And I think a big reason is this. You can't ever replicate experience in life, but also in sports. That's one thing, right? That's why you sometimes in the NFL you see them throw in their rookie quarterbacks,
right.
Throw them into the fire a little bit, throw in guys who normally wouldn't play. Why do you think late in games or in an NBA season, you have 82 games, you could still win some games, but 60 games, you're not making playoffs. Let's throw our young guys in, give them more minutes. You just can't replicate experience. Think about it. I can tell you 100 times that, hey, being a journalist is difficult, but until you experience it, you don't know. You believe me, I'm sure you do, but at the same time, to understand the things that go with it, to understand the adversity. Again, let's go back to basketball. Look at Cade Cunningham and all these young guys adapting to a new to Division I basketball, to Power 5 basketball. And same thing in football. All these guys coming in, they're probably underweight, not severely underweight, but they're not at the same strength level. And Rob Glass probably hasn't got the same amount of work he wants to. Naturally, because they're ahead of schedule. They shouldn't be where they are right now. Not in a good way ahead of schedule, right? In a way, they've flipped it because they've had to. And that's a difficult thing. Reich Schneider was ready for it. He knew as soon as Johnny Wilson was going to be out, then he was going to be the number 1 guy. But most other guys didn't, right? And that's the difficult thing. But you're right. This is going to give them really good experience, and it's going to teach them, okay, this is what happens. These are how schemes work. These are how guys are going to challenge us, confuse us. You learn from it. You understand. And more than anything, your confidence and your ability to be calm. There's not a good word for that, but
yeah, no, I understand.
You know what I mean? Your ability to be poised because you've been in these situations where things have been tough, where you guys aren't, where the offensive line is not playing well, where the team's not playing well. The ability to just find it within yourself to calm yourself and understand. Okay, we've been through this before. We know how to get around it. Those things are invaluable.
100%. It's like when I worked at Chick-fil-A, right? If I were to,
it's exactly.
If I were to go out and do a shift right now, I could do it because I've been through the worst of it. Right? You've never been to the Hamilton Marketplace Chick-fil-A. It is crazy. Okay,
I'm sure it is.
No, but that is before we get to that. Obviously, the next season, OSU has to play against TCU during this game and this week, and we will see what happens. But we will have all that coverage for you on Ocali.com, at Ocali Sports on Twitter, and at Ocali on Twitter. Follow us all there. Follow all of our coverage there. We will be reporting on this game all week. Thank you once again for tuning into Deep in the Novo. Have a great day.